name is Howard Blumenthal, and we are here for the 7th episode of Reinventing School. And today, we're talking about a difficult subject that turns out to have a lot of different facets. It's called hope. So, in our beginning to plan what this episode would be about, I guess I realized that part of what we do when we educate is we try to build some form of hope. At the same time, we are in an extraordinary situation now, the sort of merger, at least in the United States, of a new civil rights movement, if you will, at the same time as a pandemic that doesn't seem to be slowing down, despite the fact that we seem to want to be opening every business and beach in sight. So with that, we have to build hope as resilience, maybe in ways that we haven't before. And we have a few experts who can help us through all of that and hopefully solve all of these various problems that are emerging at the same time. A lot of different points of view today. So we're going to begin, and I guess we'll begin with Sharon. So Sharon Ravitch, you and I both share an affiliation with the University of Pennsylvania, and I wonder if you could just give us very briefly, what do you do? Before we get into the detail.
And thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I'm excited about the conversation. I am a professor of practice at the Graduate School of Education at Penn. I'm an applied methodologist trained as a psychologist and anthropologist. And I do community development and participatory development around the world. And most recently, I've been interested in and have put forth a framework of flux leadership and flux pedagogy for these moments of radical flux and pandemic and in the civil unrest in response to state-sanctioned police brutality.
So what's flux? And then I'm hoping you'll connect flux and hope, right?
Well, they're precisely connected. You just gave me that one, Howard. So I would say flux pedagogy is it's a multi-pronged critical relational framework. It's a critical pedagogy framework that really right now in this moment is about helping educators think about what is the radical flux of this time in the world mean for teaching, learning, and schooling. And a piece of that is about critical social theory, racial literacy, thinking about how our social identities that we came into the pandemic with radically shape our experiences of the pandemic. We know this now with a new civil rights movement. It's a continued civil rights movement that's been ignored and ignored and ignored. And now we're in this moment of radical flux too, in the ways that we understand our relationships with each other as raced beings. And so the connection I see to hope is a kind of critical hope, which is in fact Paulo Freire, who's a liberation theologist and educator from Brazil, and Bell Hooks, who has taken up his work and then gone in a bunch of critical directions about critical love, critical hope, and their relationship to critical pedagogy. That critical hope is a kind of hope born out of a critical examination of society and each and all of our places within it. And it's a choosing hope in relation to the social injustices and our different traumas and pains. And so I'll stop there, but that's a little bit of my perspective. I think we can only have hope if we engage in criticality.
So that is so much that we want to unpack. I'm looking, screens are moving around here, so I'm trying to look at 9 screens at the same time. MK Asante, right? You have some family history in education, so you have some sense, I think, of how hope, learning, education, and community kind of tie together. So I've just asked you like 19 questions in one.
But it's all connected for me. And my father and my mother, both educators. I grew up in a house full of education, and my father is one of 16 children. So get your head around that first. 1 out of 16 in Valdosta, Georgia, sharecroppers, 1942, plantation living. He grew up in the depths of racism. I mean, we have a family member, Mary Turner. She's a woman, and she was hanged in Georgia, lynched. I mean, this is part of our family history. My mom was coming from Brooklyn, destitute poverty. And this was when Brooklyn was different.
When was that?
Brooklyn's expensive now, but she don't know that Brooklyn. When she grew up,
when was that, and where in Brooklyn was that?
My mom was Bed-Stuy, 1949. And so, my mom remembers when, the projects was, aspirational, So anyway, my parents come from that background, and education was their passport that transported them out of those situations and into these new spaces, And so when I was coming up, I remember my dad, we drove up to East Stroudsburg University, and my dad was debating Cornel West and Arthur Schlesinger. And so I grew up in that kind of environment, seeing different intellectuals debating, and people coming to our house debating, Bobby Seale, all other educators having radical discussions, Ramona Africa, people from the movement in my house. So, so this is all connected to me: hope, liberation, emancipatory, education, all of
that. Zoe, Mia,
and this is and it's still connected. Let me show you how it's still connected. All right, say hi.
Ah, there we are.
Say hi.
Hey.
This is my daughter, Akira.
Hey, Akira. Nice to meet you.
So she's just the same way that I say, I grew up around intellectual discussions and things like that. This is how we're doing it. So
that's right.
Thank you. But it's great to be here. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to join.
We're honored. Thank you.
So good to
the thing that's so extraordinary about all of this is the connections between us. So there is a connection that we talked about beforehand between Sharon and your father, right?
Yeah, here's my
but also where your mom was in 1949, mom, right, in Brooklyn?
Yep.
Yeah, so was my dad, about 4 blocks away, probably.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So,
What do you know what high school your dad went to?
He actually, this is a hope story, right? So, he's a kid, a Jewish kid, and very much of a kind of a Jewish ghetto setup, right? Everybody's poor. Dad is gone when he's 8 years old because of a diabetes problem. So he lost his leg, and then he lost his life like that because poor people didn't get very good hospital care, right? So that whole story plays out. He's not so, he's a smart guy, but he's not doing great in school. And the local teacher, a teacher at the local school says, "You don't belong here." That was changed his life. You don't belong here. Wow. You belong. You're a good artist. You need to be going to the High School of Industrial Art and Design or similar. And that's what made me possible. That's what made my kids possible. It was that one teacher, right, of his, and Williamsburg, but but then it moves to Bed-Stuy about late 40s, early 50s. Yeah, so it's all really connected. Yeah. Zoe, Mia, Maya, Mia, hey. Connect all this for us. What's life at home, and what are you hoping for? That can be a big hope. That can not like I hope we're going to get the puppy, although that'd be fine. And we're recommending that to everybody during this time of hope. But yeah.
Yeah, I hope for a puppy, but other than that, I'd say, we have an interesting perspective, I'd say, because, we are privileged, and that's just like, during this,
we grow up in a predominantly white,
white area, white community.
I am able to notice the privilege in between races here, even though it's not exactly diverse as you'd say, but it's amazing to me how you can see how people don't notice it. But
I'd say I hope to be a good ally to bring awareness, especially in this community where I think a lot of people aren't aware of the racism we still face, of a lot of the challenges that minorities face, and I hope to use my privilege for good, if that makes sense, to embrace the movement, to do what I can,
growing up, while it might not be blatant racism or homophobia or anything that might be oppression to any people who are oppressed, I feel as though I'm able to like realize it, and I hope that I can contribute to overcoming it and try and be an ally and try to use my privilege to help others.
Thank you. Dr. Lara Jana, right? Now you are in a very different place from the rest of us. You're hanging out somewhere in Nebraska, if I have that right, right?
Yeah.
So give us a sense of, well, first of all, thank you for joining us, and tell us a bit about yourself and where you are. And Nebraska, I mean, we're East Coast folks here. We're trying to understand that's between here and the Pacific, right?
Go straight to the very middle of the country, north, south, east, west, and it's about an hour or two west of me. So just right in the middle. And actually I wasn't born and raised here, and I've spent a lot of my life on the coasts, but also Midwestern, having grown up in Wisconsin. And so basic who I am, I mean, it's fairly eclectic in terms of how I identify myself, but it's all, in my mind, it's all geared around children. I've always been very passionate about kids. My family used to joke I was like the Pied Piper, and I had a babysitting empire when I was 13. And so it's probably not a surprise to a lot of people that I went on and I became a pediatrician. So straight and narrow path, medical school, both parents, very academic medicine. Again, grew up with a life of privilege. Zoe and Mia, who, by the way, let me just say so I don't forget, this would be a good time to ask for a puppy, because I have 3 children that I had 3 kids in 3.5 years. And my husband used to say, no way are we getting a dog? We have 3 children. And my 22-year-old is just outside with his 13-week-old puppy. So this is a good time to ask. But, you know, with my love of children, but I was fond of early literacy. I have an identical twin sister who's out on the other coast. She's out in Silicon Valley, has been there for 25 years, very involved in early stage technology work there. And I always jokingly say that I'm entrepreneurial. I just didn't know what to do with it in the context of a very straight and narrow medical career. And then all of a sudden I figured it out. So along the way, I got involved in early education and childcare. I thought that's where the kids are. No one's paying too much attention, a very under-professionalized, undervalued field, which we're all discovering in the face of COVID and everything else. And I started digging deeper into again, it started out as early brain and child development, always interested in neuroscience, thought I might be a neurosurgeon for a while. And what I realized is I sort of stumbled upon putting the pieces together, that if you look at the foundational development, caring, responsive adult, and what happens with children sort of in that early developmental stage, you're defining human nature, that we are all connected. You need to have trust. You need to have a caring, responsive adult in your life, whether it's the one teacher that says to your father, Howard, you know, you don't belong here, but whether it's a coach, a parent, a teacher, or somebody. And then I distilled that down. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book called The Toddler Brain, distilling that down to the connecting of neurons in the developing brain and saying, what skills do we want kids to have? And while it's really important to have reading, writing, arithmetic, technical skills, those make up about 1/3 of the list that the World Economic Forum identifies as the most important skills to succeed in today's world. And if you look at all of the unrest we have, all of the instability, the skills that really are elevated now are adaptability, resilience, perseverance, emotional intelligence, perspective taking and empathy, compassion. I know, Sharon, you talk about, radical compassion and things. And so I've really started making a case for that. And it extends all the way from early childhood, K-12, parenting, higher ed. And I've gotten the attention of the business world, because that's what people want as kids are coming out of school and training, and saying, what do you really want? What skills do you want them to have? And so that's, again, why I'm so excited. And the single most important thing I think for kids is hope. I am going to bring this back to hope for you, Howard, which is, I define these 7 core skills that all kids need, and actually that all people have that need, but the 7th sort of culminating skill is what I called what if skills, the ability to imagine something that's not immediately in front of you. And that's very appealing to the business world, right? Creativity, entrepreneurship, innovation. I mean, those are the shiny objects of the business world. But it is also hope. And I end every talk I give, doesn't matter who my audience is, by saying, if you can't imagine a world or a circumstance better than the one you're born into or you're facing, then it's not just you that has a problem, it's all of us. And that's right down to how we teach kids, wire the brain to always make sure that there's hope for kids and for everyone.
But we don't. I mean, this is a group of people who have, all of us, including Zoe and Mia, have had great fortune, right? We have parents that we talk about. We have a home situation that we talk about. Despite the fact that school in its design doesn't do many of the things that you're describing, or if it does it in a haphazard way, we've managed to get past that. So, I mean, this is going to be a silly little exercise, but if you're an adult in this conversation, raise your hand if you've written a book. Yeah, there we go, right? And 4 hands go up. And I'm guessing Zoe and Mia, at least one of you will at some point, right? I mean, it's just,
working on it now.
There you go, working on it now. So there's something that we have gotten that we have in our lives that allows us to embrace hope and do a lot more with it because we've got some momentum, we've got the support, and we're not bogged down by the belief that school is going to provide us with the answers that we need in order to be able to live our lives. We've all, I mean, reading everybody's bios, we've all done an extraordinary amount of thinking about this, and then we've taken an extraordinary amount of action. Probably more than just about any of our friends, if you just kind of bring it down to a social circle. Why? What is it? MK, let me jump over to you.
Yeah, I just want to make a process note, which is, it sounds to me like you're connecting up privilege and hope.
I'm asking the question.
Or asking a question. So what I'll say is, I mean, for me, all of the frameworks for hopefulness of all of the theorists that I have always engaged, it's irrespective of their social class background. And in fact, post-traumatic growth, which is something that we all need to be thinking about now because there's so many circulations of trauma. There's collective trauma now. And many of us came into the pandemic already having trauma. Post-traumatic growth is really about everyone's ability to create the conditions and imagine the conditions for what I think of as critical hopefulness, but hopefulness, right? And so I really think that we have to unfetter hope from privilege in the sense that it is about building an equitable system moving forward and having the faith in that. But it's also about the inner resources that everyone has to be hopeful based on being a part of their own creation of the conditions for their own development of their own agency. MK, I feel like you have something to say about this. You're on mute.
Oh, we can't hear you. So please unmute.
One of the reasons why I write, is definitely connected to hope. I wrote a book called Buck, which is a memoir that talks about, my journey in school. It's a book about education, actually. It's a book about miseducation. It's a book about re-education. It's a book about street education. It's a book about self-education. It's a book about the difference between school and education. In fact, I think it was Twain that said, "Don't let school get in the way of your education." So it's a book about what I learned in Philadelphia. Even though my parents were educators, and that was a beautiful thing, and it taught us a lot. Me and my brother both spent a lot of time on the streets. My brother spent most of my life incarcerated. I've been falsely accused and had all types of things thrown at me because of my race, because of my background, because, being a Black man. So I think the idea of hope is actually instrumental in the Black community, in African-American history and African-American culture. How does one survive the institution of slavery without a deep sense of hope that, when I look at myself and when I look at what I'm doing, I'm literally the dream, the hope of my ancestors. My ancestors were on that plantation. My dad was on that plantation as a sharecropper, and they never got their fair share. At the end of the year, you always owed the person who owned the land, right? You never got anything. And so it was still kind of a system of slavery, essentially. But, the ancestors that were on those plantations, toiling those fields, you know, they dreamed about being able to write, being able to express these ideas, being able to, you know, to pursue what you want to do, your passions and your dreams, and to do it without, and the sad part is we're not there yet. You know, you can't, you know, I have a show called Wild Black on Snapchat. I don't know if you guys have seen it, Zoe and Mia, but it's a, you guys
I have Snapchat.
You guys on Snap?
Excuse us, the older participants.
Have you seen it, Zoe and Mia?
I have.
Cool.
It's in like subscriptions or something.
All right. Well,
cool.
I'm going to give everybody about 1 minute. Go run over there. We're going to take a break. And as soon as we're back,
okay.
you'll tell us more about the show. Here we go.
Thanks.
As always, going into this right after the first break is always, you know, okay, I could talk about this for hours because it's so interesting and you guys are all so interesting. Zoe, Mia, what do you make of this? And, you know, we're throwing a lot of information here. Do you have friends who struggle with hope?
I myself, I would say, struggle with hope. I mean, especially with this pandemic, with the social unrest going on. Just the other day, I had a very tough day where I just lost hope. I said, you know, like, what's the point? I'm looking at college. I'm going to be a senior. And I'm just like, what's the point of this? Where am I going to get in life? But I just had to remind myself of everything I have that's so great. My mother herself's an educator. So I'm very grateful for her, and I think she's taught me more than school could. How you said school can't really teach hope, or just all those like things you need in life. Yeah, so hope is very important. I struggle with hope, but when I can find that again, when I can remind myself of the possibilities I have, it is so helpful.
I think what's important about hope is that you know that it's not confined to one type of person, and that whether, despite your background or despite the color of your skin, everyone has a similar feeling of hope, despite like what their goal may be. But it's definitely, I have a few friends who have struggled with hope being in quarantine, whether it be with school or just everything that's going on in the media right now. It's definitely something that is concerning, but there is still like hope within all of us. And I definitely am latching onto it, employing it.
And I think we can help our friends find hope too. I think that's important to remember.
The place where I've skidded here some, before we started doing the show, is like, well, how is it that adults and leadership, but let's just call it adults, all over the world didn't figure out beforehand that we might have a pandemic, even though we've seen the signs of this many times before, and had absolutely no preparation for it? It's like, oh, everybody I know is going to suddenly show up at my house, but I didn't buy any food. Well, like, what? I mean, it's just incredible to me. And that really shattered. I'm usually a fairly optimistic guy, but that kind of took me out a little bit. Like, maybe we actually don't have any feeling for it. And the place that, for me, hope falls apart is in the structure of school and learning for this next 2 years.
And it's injustice,
beyond.
Howard, can I jump in here?
Please.
It's injustice, Howard. Like when you talk about that hope and the you know, the void of hope sometimes, think about all the students, you know, working their butt off, working their tails off, trying to get into USC, UCLA, Georgetown, any of these schools, Stanford. And then you've got people photoshopping, you know, their kids on the rowing team and paying $1 million and getting their kids in. That's the kind of thing that wipes hope out. And that's the kind of thing that deflates your spirit, because you say, well, I'm doing all of this, and, you know, or I'm working this hard, I'm reading all these books, and the president of the United States probably has never read a book in his life. Not even one book. I'm not ruling
out comic books. I think comic books are possible.
I don't think he's read a comic book. I doubt it. I highly doubt it. I would put everything on that. I'll bet everything on that. He has not read a comic book.
You know, Howard, I'm going to jump in here too, but only because since we are also talking about what caring, responsive adult in our lives has given us that one thing, I will tell you that my mother was head of the U.S. Pandemic Preparations Committee and ran the U.S. response to the AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s. And there are lots of people who anticipated this kind of pandemic. So at the same time that I am hugely, I spent 4 years as the spokesperson for the Wash Your Hands, Cover Your Cough campaign for the Centers for Disease Control. We know a lot. There are a lot of people. And what I'm hopeful about, again, I try to shift it from my significant disappointment in our response, what we've done, who's been left behind, you know, thinking of people as disposable, right, in terms of what we didn't do. I am also very hopeful because I see how much potential we have, and the conversations I'm hearing, both from, you know, professionally, like in my professional circles across all of the, you know, education, healthcare, technology, you name it. But, you know, I've got a 23-year-old, a 22-year-old, and a 20-year-old. And the level of engagement and the thinking about what do we do and how do we do it and how do we not let this happen again? Again, for me, is that how do you flip that back into hope? You know, Zoe and Mia, you guys were talking about, you know, whether it's you or your friends, giving people hope. I can do that still because I see that as an option still. We haven't lost that option, and we have lots more insights, abilities, and resources than we think we do. And, you know, to MK's, I guess, your background and your points, but if I look and I think about some of the things I started doing when I really switched into the mode of how do we make sure, I got very focused, not just on early brain and child development, but changing the life trajectories of children born into poverty facing adversity. Because it was all but carved in stone. We knew almost by zip code, right, where you could say a child born here is going to have this dismal life outcome. And my question has been, what changes that trajectory? And I was struck by a book, I don't know if you all saw How Children Succeed, when Paul Tough wrote How Children Succeed. And I was struck by the fact, a lot of it focused on kids growing up facing lots of adversity, poverty, race, all of it. The kids who made it through, whatever it was that got them over the hump, had more of the skills that now everybody agrees are the skills you need to succeed today than my kids did, or that my kids got, but I had to work so hard that they had the grit and the perseverance and the motivation and drive and all these things, that also keeps me hopeful, right? We just have to make sure that we get kids what they need in the way of, not just education sounds so formal, right? Learning, supportive environments, those sorts of things, that they can get past that hump and then change their life trajectories.
Zoe, Mia, did you get the help? You've now had how many years of school? How'd that go?
Getting for school, it's been like 10, I don't know, more than 10, whatever. But getting the help that I need to, I don't know, like, I don't know, can you, I'm losing my train of thought.
I'll take over, I guess. I don't think that I faced many setbacks throughout my education, but I could definitely say that in school there have been maybe a few teachers who I've really connected with, but I wouldn't say as many as I'd like. I think from school I got the basic education, but through my family or family friends, I think that's where I really learned the skills of life.
Yeah, within school, the one thing that I wish I had more of was more of a student-teacher bond. Well, I feel like just this past year, or even whether it be middle school or elementary school, I feel like I've had basic bonds with my teachers where I could feel comfortable asking questions, but no questions on personal matters or how I can like help with the outside world or how I should educate myself better almost.
Sharon, thank you. Sharon, you are affiliated with the Graduate School of Education at one of the better universities or a highly ranked university in the world. Why what are we doing? What Laura is saying about the things that need to be learned, what Zoe and me are saying, what we're all saying, it doesn't match what schools have evolved to become. We're still in a world where mathematics or social studies or STEM or whatever those academic subjects might be, that's important, but public health?
Well, I'll jump in.
How your body works? Help me. Why are we not doing this?
Yeah, so I have lots of answers to that, and I know MK does as well. I'll start with tax-based funding for schools. And when we hear about the history of redlining and other unethical, inequitable practices foisted upon Black people around where they could buy houses and get loans, et cetera, or not, usually not. Redlining created a situation now where tax-based funding for schools completely belies the myth of democracy that the United States has. You're not a democracy when your wealth makes better schools for the wealthy kids. That's literally not democracy.
Okay,
so,
but
I'll start there, but wait, one more thing. I'll just say, tax-based funding for schools meets up with, right, when MK's father, God bless him and send him my love, was a sharecropper, that is this, right? Like, slavery was never ended, it was shifted, right? That's what abolitionist pedagogical frameworks are about. And so really what I see is our schools are social reproduction machines. And that meeting up with the neoliberal wanting to, create the workforce, meeting up with structural racism and the ways that and structural anti-indigeneity. I mean, we were built on settler colonialism and slavery. And our
school system
reflects that still to this day.
Why are we still doing this?
Because we're racist. Because we're a deeply racist, settler, colonialist country. And we keep getting away with it because our Constitution actually supports it. And we have intergenerationally valorized people who are racist, who were slaveholders. These are our founders. These are, right? What we're seeing right now, I believe, and MK, I'm curious what you think, we're going to hit the reset button. This is a reset button.
I get
the system's
the race
broken.
thing.
It was never not broken.
Right.
It's just,
and we all acknowledge that. And MK, I'm going to point this in a direction in a second. That doesn't explain to me why we're teaching math and not how your body works. It doesn't explain.
Yes, it does. Because that's Western imposition. Western ontology and epistemology says it's about knowledge, and knowledge is this very finitely cast thing, and it's values and feelings, and our entire school system reflects a Western hegemony around a very specific form of knowledge that reflects white Western knowledge.
I'll jump in because I think I know where you're heading, because I agree with everything that Sharon just said. But I also, when I present the subject, I come at it from a different angle to address exactly what you're saying, which is very simplified 20th century industrial era. When we set up for an industrial era education system, which is what we did, it was assembly line, one size fits all, right, on a time clock. You clock in, you clock out, it has to be at those times. And you wanted as many widgets produced as you could, right, at the end of it. And so what I do is sometimes people give me, 14 minutes to present the whole big picture. And I say, listen, if we are now living in a globally connected, globally complex world that is rapidly changing, and COVID has only made that more exaggerated, unrest makes that more exaggerated, but it's been true.
Right.
What skills become more valuable in that context?
That's
right. And
that's
what I always say, and I had the opportunity to present at the World Bank this year at their annual meeting, and it was all their human development people. And the head of the World Bank said, in very unstable times, right, what capital do you invest? Because they're in the business of giving capital to countries, and the IFC does it to private businesses even. And I always, I distill down. I do a lot of translation just into practical language that hopefully won't bore any of you, including you, Zoe and Mia, so tell me if I'm getting boring. I would say, listen, if in the early 1900s, you decided you were gonna invest some money in something, and you invested in the horse and buggy, you probably would have lost your money. That investment doesn't get you anywhere because it changed. cars came into play. And from what I understand, only 5% of people in the horse and buggy industry made the transition into the automobile industry. When things get very complex and very unstable, your single best investment is in human capital. You don't know what's coming, so what skills become valuable are adaptability, perseverance, the ability to make mistakes and adapt. And again, Zoe and Mia, you can elaborate, but I would imagine you're hearing more about being able to fail and make mistakes. The problem is that we can pay lip service to that and say it's really important, at the same time that we still have an industrial era system that says you take standardized tests because that's one size fits all. And even if we're now starting to realize they don't have predictive value and they've got all sorts of racial factors that play into it that are not just, we still are using that old system. We're recognizing the move forward, and we're in this period of flux, right? Where how do we shift a whole system? But it's not just the system, it's the mindset. Recognizing that
that's right. System and mindset.
I was going to ask MK to go and find his daughter again, because I think she's the center of this conversation in a lot of ways. Please remind us of her name again.
This is Akira.
Akira.
Yeah.
So Akira is how old?
Akira is 3, and her twin sister is sleeping right now.
Oh, there we are. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, so we're talking about education. By the way, I would love to sit in on Sharon, one of your classes. I loved everything.
I'd love to sit in on one of yours.
It was excellent. I'm a professor at Morgan State University.
I know.
Creative writing and screenwriting and in English and film. And so we talk about a lot of, for me, education has always been something that isn't really in the classroom. My education came from just everywhere. To me, education is 24/7, 365. It's not a place where you go and, to speak to some of the things you were saying, when I think about education now, I totally agree with, by the way, what you're saying about the industrial model of education and how that's obviously antiquated now. But it's also not antiquated. The prison industrial complex is where that labor has gone. So,
that's exactly right.
like I said, I know a lot of people that have been in the prison industrial complex, and they come out and they'd be like, yo, I made like thousands of license plates. I was working for Victoria's Secret, for, this company, all these Fortune 500 companies that they're That's producing right. for, and they're getting paid like 15 cents an hour, and it's legal because, again, like you said, in the Constitution, right, you can't have slavery, right? There's a minimum wage, but it's all different when you're
exactly right.
when you're incarcerated.
Right? Dream for me a little
exactly
bit.
Right.
MK, dream for me a little bit. You've got this curriculum that really defines what school in the United States is all about. You have Akira and another daughter, right? They're about to go through it. I'm giving you a magic wand. What does school look like for them? What is 12 years, if it is 12 years or 13 years or preschool or college added to it, whatever it is? What are we doing now? And try to be specific.
A couple of things.
You don't think they need to learn, and what do you want to add?
Okay, well, when I was struggling with school growing up, I wrote this poem called 2 Sets of Notes. And I want to share a little bit of it with you, but it basically speaks to that. It's fine. It speaks to that. It's fine. And the poem is, I'll try to remember some of it here, but I say, I find myself feeling as if I'm touching the ground and the ceiling. In these schools that don't engage in healing, they simply open the wounds and entrap me in rooms where I am consumed by hypocrisy. But hold up. Even Western philosophers weren't the authors of their own philosophies, and the statues on campus be watching me. Washington, Jefferson, Williams clocking me as if to say, my time's up. But I don't run laps on track. See, I run laps around the scholars of tomorrow because they call our new histories borrowed, and they label me militant and Black national radical, and they tried to put my learning process on sabbatical. But I don't apologize for those truths that I see and those lies that I despise. Then they try to get me to see their point of view from a cat that looked like me, but he don't walk like me, talk like me, or act like me. And that brother started running when I asked if he was Black like me, mastering their thoughts and forgetting our own. And you wonder why we always feel alone. From the media to academia, hanging brothers like coats. That's why in they schools, I always take 2 sets of notes. One set to ace the test, and the other set I call the truth. And when I find historical contradictions, I use that first set as proof that Black youth's minds are being polluted, convoluted, diluted, not culturally rooted in anything except the Western massacre. That's why most of us in school, we were scared of Africa. That poem goes on and on and on. And I end the poem by saying, you know, Black students, brown students, all students always take 2 sets of notes. Because the idea that I was raised with and developed as I was coming up was, there's always gonna be, like, you know, Christopher Columbus discovered America, right? That's the narrative that they're going to, so you have to be, what you talked about in the beginning, Howard, is like really that critical thinking part, right? So what I want for my daughters most is their ability to see through the lies, to be critical thinkers, to challenge things, to ask questions, to sometimes have to take multiple sets of notes. Because yeah, I still had to pass the test. I still had to say Christopher Columbus discovered America for the test, right? But I had to write in the margins, you know, that seems like it's impossible if there was people already here, right? So it's like, I had to ask these questions to myself. So I think part of it is, I want to instill in my children the idea of, you know, engaging critically with the world, asking questions, not just taking, you know, that as truth just because it was said, even by teachers, because sometimes the teachers don't know.
Exactly.
I realized once I got older that my teachers, it wasn't that they were, you know, trying to deprive me from certain things, but they didn't know it themselves.
Right.
You know, I have a nephew. My nephew is 19 years old in Philadelphia, you know, right now, and he's been shot 9 times. And, you know, his principal calls me and we talk about, you know, his principal wants to talk to me about school. And, you know, I'm just trying to explain to him that my nephew's got other things, you know, going on with the trauma and just with everything in his life. And he needs things that he can learn that seem practical, right? Because again, when you're living in an environment, you know, what connection does this particular education have with getting my family out of poverty? You know what I mean? What connection does this have with getting, you know, stopping the violence that's in my community? What connection? We don't learn personal finance in school.
I know, it's crazy.
We don't learn nobody knows anything about money or business, or we don't learn about the stock market. I mean, you think about, there's none of this information is taught, at least not in, I went to public school in Philly. I went to alternative school in Philly.
That's the thing. It's taught in some places.
It's taught in some places, exactly.
And you know,
but in the places where it's taught, it probably isn't, they don't even need to teach it.
We need to change
precisely.
This, but we're not going to change it now because we have to take a break. We're all doing a great job expressing what we hope will become, right? I mean, it's sort of a 2-step process. The thing that I still cannot understand is if so many people who I speak with from so many different aspects, so many different parts of the education industries, school, students, and all that, most people say the same things. Now, it may be that the people who say yes to us tend to be people who are thinking more sensitively about these issues, but this doesn't seem that hard. It doesn't seem as though school, it shouldn't be this difficult, I guess is what I'm getting at, because the complaints that we're talking about are complaints that were being made by Dewey 100 years ago. They go back to the reason why scouting was formed, because school wasn't doing its job wasn't doing a complete job in 1908.
It's not the awareness, it's the will.
Well, but
we know what we need to know. We don't have the will.
So
Like, we know what we need to do to have the best, most equitable, awesome, super humanizing to all student schools in the world. We just don't do it.
And we don't spend the money. You got to spend the money.
It's differentially spent by tax base.
We spend more money in the United States than, I would say, probably 2/3 of the nations on earth on education and school. We get lousy results because we put together a crazy system, but we unfairly fund. But how do you take hope and map it onto this terrible institutional inability to change what we've known as wrong for 100 years?
Action.
The situation is not.
Action is what makes hope.
Well,
possible.
Here we are. Why are we not taking action?
We are.
What do we need to be doing to change this? What are you hoping that adults will finally get off their butts and do?
Protest in the streets. Oh, they are.
Oh, we are. Yeah. Well, it took us long enough. But Zoe, Mia, what do you think?
Now. That's what I'm saying. I think we're here now. We are here now. And for me, yeah, we all know why we haven't looked back. Let's decide, how do we take action in and on hope, and then, have a diffusion effect of all the small pockets of hopefulness that have to really line up through action to change systems, and then to change people and curricula and programming and professional development within systems.
And Howard, for my part, I took a little bit of a different approach to this, because when I started talking about early childhood, if I, as a pediatrician, say that I own a childcare center, MK, I'll have to share with you, I write books for kids on potty training and brushing teeth and how to be a good 3-year-old kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
I get a pat on the shoulder.
When I read your bio, I was like, oh, he's perfect. I definitely need to chop it up with you.
I know, and I need to read your. But here's the thing, though. I get a pat on the shoulder. I must be a very nice person. I'm a nice Midwestern pediatrician mom who writes cute books for kids, right? We still have this underlying value of the hard sciences when everyone is recognizing the importance of all these soft, non-cognitive other skills. And what I realized, and what I've sort of taken on as a mission, which sometimes gives people the wrong impression of where I'm coming from, is I thought, if we don't convince business and policymakers that this is important, right? I can talk to pediatricians, educators, students, parents, you name it, and I am preaching to the choir. What I did was I said, let me put this in language that you might understand, Mr. Congressman, or, Mr. Business Leader. And I was literally told nobody wants a book that connects these concepts with business. And then I was invited to keynote at the US Chamber of Commerce on early childhood in the workforce. But the important part here is I thought, okay, in what language, just like it's important to engage anybody you're working with, teaching, learning, you want people to be engaged. I said, first of all, people love neuroscience. It's a lot harder to argue with the connecting of neurons in the developing brain. And when we're talking about things like hope and creativity and resilience and things, we now have defined areas of the brain. Like, it's super intriguing.
Yeah.
And in fact, when we switch into the mode of rote memorization, even if it's like project-based learning, but you have to check off the boxes of what you're doing, you are switching gears in your brain back into that default mode that's that industrial era check the box mode. Whereas the creativity that everybody's after, and this is where I use the language like 1,500 global CEOs surveyed, single most important factor is creativity, then you start saying, why don't they value the work that you do, MK, right? Like when you go, wow, that's so, whether it's hip hop, filmmaking, arts, all these things, those are the skills you want. We've just discounted them as like a cute little nice side project that makes you feel good. And we don't, but I do see that shift. And I think distilling down to making people understand in whatever language they need, whether it's economic, whether it's humanitarian, whether it's, justice, whatever it is, we're getting there. But it also is the structures. If you think about companies, the really big powerhouse companies develop a culture around them and they run like well-oiled machines, and then they have to pivot and they don't do it well. And they acquire startups and they try to pivot. Look at education, look at healthcare. We built these behemoth of institutions that we thought were what we wanted. And now we say, wait a minute, they're heading us in this direction. And not only do we have all this inequity built in, but we also aren't even getting the skills we want, even for the people that we designed them for. It is like moving a mountain. I am traveling around talking to all those people who are interested in how do we get there. Some of it is how do we assess it? Because if everyone's going to invest in it, they want to know, is it working? Like, what are we doing and is it working? But I see a huge shift towards social, emotional intelligence, creativity, project-based learning. But how do you do that within a very confining structure that we did such a good job of building up? And now we have to sort of take it apart and rethink it again.
And racial literacy.
I love what you just said, because one of the things, Dr. Lara, one of the things I love about what you just said is I share with my students at Morgan State, I share this article written called Inside the Baby's Brain. And this article, and my students in creative writing, they wonder why is he sharing this article about the baby's brain? Because the whole article is about the suppression of the prefrontal cortex and what happens when that happens and all the neurons that are firing in a baby. They said, a baby, every day for a baby is like going to Paris for the first time, right? Just everything is new. And so, but when they study jazz musicians' brains, and they study when you're in a movie theater and you're watching a movie, same thing that's happening with a baby's brain is happening to the jazz musician when he's doing improv. And so that's ultimately our goal as adults, really, is to become like babies, is to become like babies. And so that's my whole goal in creative writing. Let us become like babies. Yeah.
So Zoe, Mia, and then Sharon, but Zoe and Mia, are having gone through school and hearing a lot of this because you have education in the house. How does this play out, and where do you see it going? Because you're on the front lines.
Well, I just want to start by saying you're all so well spoken and so truly educated outside of the box, and
I am going to tell my kids you said so.
But you all give me hope, and honestly, sitting here, I feel uneducated. I don't know what to do. I haven't been.
The Georgetown shirt on the Hoyas. You got it. You got it.
But
you guys, by the way, are doing a great job of articulating your ideas.
I agree. I really agree.
Give us hope.
Yeah, it takes courage, and making yourselves vulnerable is really a good thing to practice.
Yes.
And quite honestly, Zoe and Mia, as much as it sounds like you think what we're saying is good, nobody wants to hear us. They all want to hear you. Because,
right, exactly.
Again, that is
what do you guys think? What do you guys think?
Throughout school, I've become a very linear thinker, and I take one step at a time. I have to do step one first, then step two. It's no jumping around for me. I find it very hard to do that. But I think that's because I've been in school. With having more outside forces, whether talking to my mom, who's another different educator, not my teachers in school, I feel like I could have jumped around more, or used more creativity to be able to think a different way. And the way that the school system I've been in it, it's shown me that's almost the only way to think.
And I think I agree with what she's saying. And when there's all this pressure to get the good grades, to check the marks, it's easy for me to just fall in okay, this is what I have to do. I have to learn what they're telling me, to just get it done, get the grades, especially in these times, it's easy for me to get anxiety, and I just shut down, and I'm this is what I have to do, so I'm done.
Many times throughout the school year, I've gotten to a point where it's just I'm so stressed out and overwhelmed. I only want to do what I have to do. And that's keeping me from learning other things that I am interested in and want to. Elementary and middle school, and even a part of high school, you have to take you have to take a math course, you have to take an English course, some type of history, and some type of science. There's very little room for an elective or anything that I want to do. So after we call a main course, there's very little room for me to work and actually do things that I want to do.
What do you want to do?
I'm interested in math and science stuff. Or
why? Why?
I just enjoy it. Doing I'm fine if you give me something that is science related or math related to do all day. I'll want to do it, and I find it interesting. I'm learning new things. I've liked my biology course that I had this year, and I enjoyed the class, and I liked the teacher. So that's why I feel I like it more. And also the way the brain works, the way that people think intrigues me, because there's some places where I really cannot fathom why people would ever say what they have just said in front of so many people. And it really baffles me sometimes. And I'm oh, sorry.
All beings welcome. Don't worry
Yeah,
about it.
of course. So,
Yes, sorry about that. But it just surprises me why people would willingly say some things that I strongly disagree with. And I just can't understand why they would think that. So I want to learn what goes on in their brain that makes them.
So we are going to have to talk after this show because I'm going to be a math major. I majored in cellular molecular biology, and I worked in neuroscience labs. And if you look, again, I write books on potty training. So people are like, oh, she writes cute books. And I'm like, oh, you want to talk math or epigenetics or something? That gets me really excited. But the thing that you said that's really important is there is a big shift coming, whether you see it or not, which is one of the single most important ingredients is the passion, right? And what we've done, I think, in traditional education is stripped away context, stripped away the meaning, right? Like all the emotional context and the importance of what's going on in your life. And now I want you to think, you guys, Zoe and me in particular, but think about what's going on with coronavirus. Yeah. Do you hear the level of inability of people to accept the unknown, right? It's how could they have told us this thing last week and now they're telling us this week? You know why? Because it's unknown. That would be novel coronavirus. While there are things that we know. And so the problem is we have created at least, multiple generations of people who have no tolerance for anything but linear thinking. You are supposed to have one right answer and then, you go that way and that's it. And now all of a sudden it's try lots of things, see what works. We think it works, now it's wrong. And that's where you guys keep that in mind as you're playing the game, as MK said with his 2 sets of notes, right? You play the game, you figure out how to get done what you need to do to get where you need to go, but don't lose your sense of what you love to do, what is important, and think about how you could apply it yourself, even if you're not getting it in school.
Much of the time professionally that I spent with students or with coworkers has dealt entirely with the unknown, because creative people actually are quite lucky during this time, because we always go in going, we don't know anything, we're going to make it up. And that's what creative people do. We write it, we start with a blank sheet. Nothing is ever known. Occasionally a client or a teacher will say, you have to do something about a mouse, or you have to do something within this room or something like that. But for the most part, it's completely open. That has turned out, for me anyway, to be a tremendous gift, very closely aligned with hope, because I'm comfortable with the unknown. I'm comfortable with the novel. It's like novel coronavirus. Where do I read it? Oh, it's not a novel. Like everything contains a joke, right? Because that's the way creative people either are forced to think, or it's the way we learn to think. MK, you want to jump on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just see, again, going back to, so let's just go back to the African-American experience. So there were women during slavery that made quilts. And these women were interesting because, number one, we're talking about slave days, and we're talking about women that didn't have a lot of resources, obviously. They didn't have one big piece of cloth. So what they would do is they would get scraps of different cloth and they would, make a quilt. And that's called making something out of nothing. That's called spinning, gold from wax. That's called the maximization of minimal resources. And that's just part of when you're forced to be creative because of the restriction. Even with Twitter's 140 characters. So it forces you to be creative, you know what I mean? Because you only have a short amount of time to express that. So you have these women that made these quilts. The quilts were resourceful. The quilts were also aesthetically beautiful. They were vibrant and colorful. The quilts were also practical. They were meant to keep you warm. And the other thing about the quilts were they would embed symbols into the quilts that would have like maps of the stars or maps of the Underground Railroad, so that other enslaved Africans would be able to use the quilt to get free. So here you have a piece of art made by women who are enslaved that's resourceful, beautiful, practical, and emancipatory. It could actually get you free. And so when I think about, limitations and not having a strict, I think about that's really where the juice is, honestly. And, we obviously we want resources and we want to be able to do things, but I also see the flip side of that is that when you take music class out of public school in New York in the 70s, we create hip hop and turntablism by scratching records together and making an entirely new art form. So part of the ingenuity of, Black experience in America is taking something and taking nothing and making something from it. And so, and I see that all around the world, really, when you're dealing with, like, I've traveled all around the world and, been amazed by the resourcefulness that people have. And that's why, again, I don't even think we understand in America, how much we waste and how much it's unbelievable.
MK, you probably saw in India the term Jugaad innovation, Jugaad, which again is innovation with scarcity. Yes. And again, this gets back to my point of how do you help kids succeed, but they have to have the bare minimum, right? You have to have scraps, but what scraps could you help them get them to put together something? But the ingenuity and creativity really flourishes as long as you can make sure that kids have enough to thrive on. So I love the concept.
Sharon, close us out on hope.
Oh boy. Well, I think the story that MK just told about sums up hope. Well, and I guess I'll pull two things from what MK just said to close it up. It's hope in that it is creative, and that requires something that I'm thinking a lot about these days, like an emotional imagination, right? How do we, critical pedagogy, racial literacy, the work of Howard Stevenson at the Penn Graduate School of Education is all about how do we read ourselves in the world, and how do we read ourselves and the world with criticality, around who we are. And for me, and speaking to you, Zoe and Mia, and to all of us, it's really our ability to read ourselves and the world in the world, and in relational ways that are about advancing not just ourselves, or not just our families, or not just the people we care about, but everyone. That our liberation is bound up in everybody being liberated. And that is an ethic, I think. It's not just an ethic of hope. It's an ethic of collective hope. And it's an ethic of hope being born out of a humanizing solidarity of people. We're seeing that right now in the United States and around the world. We're actually seeing this kind of hope. So I'll end us with the hope of the people in the streets of the United States who are speaking with their feet in the middle of a pandemic, at risk to themselves. That is embodied hope, and that's going to carry us forward. And some of us are too old or immunocompromised to be in the streets, right? So we need young people in this hope. And we need you, all of you, and your friends and your community to fight for justice and to not be okay with the fact that you have privilege unless you are seeing to it as a practice of your everyday life to make sure that the world is more equitable to everyone, and do something towards that every single day before you go to sleep. That's my advice.
That's pretty good. For me, hope grows when I'm in conversations like this one. So thank you all very much. After the credits, if you can, hang out, because we kind of do a little bit of a very informal, non-recorded post game to just go, what did we just do? So we will see everybody next week. And if my memory is right, we're going to be talking about what it's like to combine school and home. For on-demand episodes and more, visit our website. Kids on Earth contains hundreds of video interviews with students from around the world. Learning Revolution is a global collaboration network for people who care about learning. Be sure to join us next Thursday for a new episode of Reinventing School. Thanks for watching.